Wholesaler Masterminds is so much more than this podcast that you've been enjoying, and I'll bet you know that. But did you know that we have a 6-month coaching program that we've been doing for the better part of 6 years? Over the course of that 6-month period of time, we're going to power wash your practice. If you're an experienced wholesaler with 20 plus years of wholesaling experience, we're going to look in the nooks and crannies, look at the details of your practice, make sure that we can improve where improvements need to be made. And if you're a new wholesaler, if you've been wholesaling for 2 years versus 20, we're going to help you set in place habits and behaviors that will carry you through to the next 20 years. If you want more information about Wholesaler Masterminds Priority Partner Coaching, please hit us up at the website wholesalermasterminds.com. Click on the contact link, send us a message. Wholesalermasterminds.com, Priority Partner Coaching. What have you read recently in the industry press, wholesalers? You know, it isn't getting easier out there. Dare I state the obvious? There was a story that ran recently in wealthmanagement.com, the next gen wholesaler. We excerpted actually a slide from it. We called it "This One Chart Should Scare the Crap Out of You." I don't know if you happen to read it. A lot of people did. It was shared like over 500 times on LinkedIn, or perhaps close. Neil Bathon, who's the founder and partner of Fuse Research, has some pretty dark quotes inside of this story. He says, and I quote, "There are a few things I'm more certain of than the fact that there are limited opportunities for wholesalers to influence buying decisions, and it gets more and more limited every month." Bathon says, "I had a woman come up to me after one of my presentations, and she said, 'I've consistently been the top wholesaler at our firm, and I think I have about a 3-year window to try to figure it out, how to reinvent myself in order to be relevant.'" Wholesalers, do you share some of those issues, some of those concerns? We won't have time to address all of them in 20 minutes, but you bet we're going to address some of them. Stand by. Welcome to the only podcast on the planet dedicated to exploring the art, science, and lifestyle of wholesalers and their leaders. This is the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show. I'm your host, the founder of Wholesaler Masterminds, Rob Shore. Wholesalers, welcome back to the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show. Wholesalers, we're going to do something unique and different and innovative. Well, I don't know about innovative. You'll be the judge. We have an industry executive with gobs of distribution experience, well-respected leader in our industry. His name is Mark Spina. He's the head of U.S. private client services at Russell Investments. In his role, Mark is the senior executive responsible for leading and expanding Russell Investments U.S. business with leading wealth management firms. Mark is a member of the firm's Global Executive Committee and Global Risk Committee. He's tasked with overseeing the firm's global business. Mark reports directly to the CEO and is based in New York City. He has extensive and diverse experience with business management, sales, marketing, and product responsibilities. Now, to complement and further refine our discussion today, to stay focused today on relationship building with financial advisors, how do I continue to build solid relationships, perhaps expose some new opportunities I didn't even know existed through unique and different channels, because you know at Wholesaler Masterminds, we're all about unique and different and staying out of the sea of sameness. We bring you Dave Maloney. Dave is formerly a financial advisor at Morgan Stanley. He created a 10-event athletic contest in 2008 to settle a friendly bet among friends. In 2009, he converted the contest into a fundraising competition to pay homage to his mother's battle with cancer. It was originally called the Wall Street Decathlon, a contest that brought together advisors, asset managers, and high net worth investors to compete in a 10-event contest modeled after the popular NFL scouting combine. Thanks to a proprietary performance-based pledging system that Maloney developed to permit the public to wager on athletes' athletic performances, the contest raised $125,000 in its first year and crowned Wall Street's best athlete. Since 2009, the D10 has expanded to 5 cities, attracted participants from over 1,000 broker-dealers, asset managers, professional service firms, technology and energy companies, and is responsible for raising $9.3 million plus to fund pediatric cancer research. Between these two guys, we're going to look at how to get at advisors in a more meaningful and interesting way. Gentlemen, welcome to the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And Mark, thank you for calling in. Appreciate it.
Rob, good to talk with you.
It's good to talk with you. Mark, let's start with you. We've been chewing today on that quote from Neil. It's accompanied by one of the other data points inside of the article, that is to say the post, the next gen wholesaler, what impacts advisor investment selections. And wholesalers, in case you haven't seen it, number 3 on the list was wholesaler interaction. Above that was third-party data sourcing. And above that was personal screens. What impacts advisor investment selections? Number 1 was personal screens. Number 2 was third-party data solutions. And number 2 was third-party data solutions. Number 3 was wholesaler interaction. Mark, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are senior executives at your firms telling you? And as importantly, how do you begin to manage that within your legion of wholesalers? Kind of a compound question there, but we'd really be hungry for some of your perspective.
Sure, Rob. It's like a decathlon question. I'll try and take it in a couple parts. And I would say first and foremost, I agree with the direction that Neil and the team at Fuse are pointing to in terms of a more complex, more challenging operating environment for wholesalers on a go-forward basis. That said, though, I think there continues to be significant and compelling opportunities for wholesalers who distinguish themselves, and like the D10, it's going to take a diverse set of skills to stay relevant and to compete. What we see, and in talking with colleagues across the industry, wholesalers are going to have to sharpen their game across a few key dimensions. One is capital markets, a general awareness of what is happening in the capital markets, both from their firm's perspective as well as the advisor's firm's perspective, to the extent there is a home office view on the markets. And the wholesaler has to be able to compare and contrast their view versus the advisor's point of view. And in many ways, that is simply table stakes. It's a test for acumen. It's a test of seriousness, and it's an initial screen, if you will, of whether or not the advisor feels like the wholesaler is somebody he or she can work with. Quickly, I'd say product acumen remains important, where that's been the hallmark of wholesalers on a historical basis. That has to be rounded out further with an understanding not only of your own products, but how they complement, compare, contrast to other available products and solutions. As you mentioned, screening is a tool that's being used more often. So how does your product compare to complement those other products that are coming through an advisor screen? And you should know that going into the meeting. You don't want to get hit with that information in the initial conversation with the advisor. I'll pause there. I know it gives you a lot to think about and follow off with.
Well, it does, and I appreciate your thoughtful insights on it. One of the things I should state right up front, wholesalers, is I respectfully disagree with Neil. I think his view is indeed dark. I think I won't cite political figures because we are not a political commentary place, but I think it's a particularly dark comment. Will there be a culling of some kind? Yes. Will that culling be influenced by the next recession? Yes. Do we always see distributors recalibrate when a market melts down next time and a recession hits us and the battle of revenue versus income starts to take place? They do. Mark, you spoke about product acumen. You spoke about global insights, knowledge about the economic front, both domestically and abroad. How will relationships play into this? You know, so many wholesalers become increasingly concerned that relationships seem to not be as important, certainly, as this story quoted some of other industry leaders that, of course, we all respect. Back in the old days when I wholesaled, yes, it was very easy to form relationships, and they weren't necessarily product-based relationships. How is relationship development going to be impacted by investment platforms, this notion of screening process, when we have teams that are turning over investment selection to analysts? How do relationships get impacted? How are they formed, or can they be formed?
Yeah, so I think, Rob, and counter to some of the trends in the Fuse report, I would say relationships are and will be as important as they've ever been. And wholesalers are going to have to find ways to connect with advisors. I would say the time it takes to build those relationships, the complexity of those relationships, the research of those relationships, the follow-up of those relationships, the bar will be raised on all of those fronts. So maybe to say, just showing up in an office and building a relationship like you could a decade ago, those days are likely behind us. The ability to build relationships, though, is very much as important and a prerequisite. We just need to find new, different, and updated ways to make that happen.
So let's make the turn to bring in our second guest, which is Dave. And in order to do that, before we kind of take that turn and bridge the discussion gap, wholesalers, I want to remind you that part of the relationship building process is doing your reconnaissance work. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that, because it is a fundamental cornerstone to what we know is critically important at Wholesaler Masterminds, because we see it work constantly. And if you're not familiar with advisor reconnaissance, go out to the website. In the search bar in the upper right, put in advisor reconnaissance. Read as much as you can. If you're interested in buying the online course, fine. Doesn't matter if you do or doesn't matter if you don't. But I'm telling you that advisor reconnaissance is a cornerstone. It'll help set the stage for the relationship that you might even hope to build. Critically important. Dave Maloney, D10. How can we meld together what Mark and I just discussed, this notion of there's things at work here that make the relationship building process with a financial advisor more difficult to get at? How does D10 help us bridge that? Let's start there.
It's a great question. This comes down to time and value, and as the advisors may have less time for the wholesalers, it becomes how much more value does the wholesaler bring to that individual's practice. And so what the D10 does is we look at the world as, for the limited amount of time that we may have, how to make the maximum value out of it. For more advisors that are certainly the successful ones that are devoting more time and energy to health and wellness, if that wholesaler can get positioned through the D10 as somebody that is alongside the wholesaler for that health and wellness sort of facet of their life, that relationship then is easier to parlay into perhaps the business at hand. And that is one of the key pieces that has made the D10 successful to date. As you mentioned at the start of the show, I was a financial advisor, and so the D10 is built largely through the perception, the perspective of the advisor, and I don't think that perspective will ever go away.
You know what's interesting about this, as I was doing my background investigative work on this, is D10 was founded through the extraordinary efforts that you have exerted, and it should be said that your cohort in founding this worked for a distributor and was a wholesaler. And so this very event comes about through a collaboration of advisor and wholesaler. Is that a fair observation?
That is. In fact, that the first iteration of the D10 was a very sort of sophomoric, playful, stereotypical outing in which there were advisors, wholesalers, and friends that had done business with one another and were friends with each other, and we were there to settle a friendly bet. And it was sort of a conversation that persisted through the wholesalers and advisors that were sort of doing business with one another for years, and sort of morphed into this contest. And man, we never thought it would go to where it was, but it was a very simple, straightforward origin.
I'm going to give him a shout out, but I'm not going to use his last name, because if I do, I might have to get it through his compliance department. Greg, thank you for participating. Good to see you yesterday. He'll know what I mean. I want to further that discussion then by kind of, connecting the dots here, because Mark, I didn't realize, it was an honest question. I said to Dave, okay, you invited Mark to be on the show. I'm delighted. I've known Mark. You've been gracious enough to have me with your colleagues to MMI to speak, and thank you for that. But how does this fit with D10? You tell the story, Mark. How does D10 fit into your life and distribution?
Sure, Rob. So I've been participating in the D10 since 2010. So not quite at the onset, but I've seen it grow and develop from a local New York City-oriented competition into something that now is on the cusp of going international, going from settling a friendly bet to the most powerful charitable event for pediatric cancer in the country. We just finished the 2017 New York event, and I believe, Dave, we raised close to $1.5 million in the New York event this year. So the combination of competition and charity, Rob, is differentiated and appealing to me. And to tack a little bit here, like the notion of SRI, ESG investing, people looking to do good with their money, both from an investment and charitable perspective, is rising in prominence. So in addition to all the factors that Dave mentioned as to why wholesalers may be interested in this, I think that's this ESG SRI framework is another one that I would mention. If you go purely to the athletic, I'd say, for me, as I get older, it's a competition of you versus you. How did I do last year versus this year? It's a competition of you versus the competition. And then, to be clear, though, there's this enormous camaraderie across participants where everybody's rooting for each other to have great success because it's all going to charity. So it's a fun, powerful, differentiated event.
I want to comment on a couple of things, but before I do, I want to make sure that everyone in the audience understands the acronyms that you used. SRI, Socially Responsible Investing, and ESG is, Mark?
Environmental, social, and governance.
Thank you.
Some variation of those three words. Though.
The other comment that I want to make on this is wholesalers. One of the things when I'm working with clients around their PVP, their peerless value proposition, especially if the wholesaler is millennial, they want to be able to show advisors, especially older advisors, how to tap into the millennial investor. It's interesting to me that if you're a wholesaler, especially an older wholesaler, and you're trying to figure out how to make headway into the millennial advisor, if you followed all of that, this is a pathway. And I think, Dave, it's important to point out, you don't have to be young and fit. Well, fit perhaps, but you don't have to be young to participate in D10 because there are age classes. Is that correct?
There is. And our median participant in New York City specifically is 32 years old. So they're not necessarily fresh-faced right out of school either.
And that's an important notion. But it was when Mark said that, it triggered this other benefit here that a wholesaler could derive, especially, again, if they've been in the field 20 years and a little bit longer in the tooth than the fresh-faced wholesaler just off the desk that's participating in D10. The other thing that I wanted to ask a question about is how, give me an example, if you can think of one, Dave. Give me an example of where you see the wholesaler, and I want to stay focused on this because this is why we're here. It's not just a big commercial for D10.
Sure.
How has a wholesaler that you've seen practically benefited from the engagement? Do you have a story that you could tell us, perhaps?
Absolutely.
About a relationship that developed and real business opportunity that came out of this great venture?
Without question, and in fact, I can't emphasize enough. The D10 comes, is built from the perspective of the advisor. So what we've seen in New York City, for example, is we had big Merrill P. Big teams that tough to get in front of, and they were participating in the D10. Now, what that meant was they were going to spend 4 months training for this. And there's a set training schedule. We have these D10 classes. But even if they didn't exist, they were going to train for it. And so we saw advisors training, and so we went out to wholesalers that we knew, again, from our perspective, it was important that they were in front of these teams. And we said, look, if they may be difficult to get in front of in the office, we know where they are 4 days a week. They're training for the D10, and here's where they're training, and this is what they're doing. Hop into those workouts. Build the relationship. We say you can learn more about a person in an hour of play than a year of conversation. And so what ended up happening is, yes, you had advisors who are now training alongside wholesalers. Additionally, we knew of the high net worth investors that were participating and training in the D10. So we led the wholesalers, we sort of tipped them off on that, so that the wholesalers could bring the advisors into an environment where those advisors were going to be in front of new high net worth investors. So if knew how those relationships were going to be valued from each of those parties, and we saw that come to fruition. We saw the Merrill P. Big teams building substantial business as a result of their participation in the D10, and we saw that business being supported by the wholesalers.
What an awesome example. Thank you for sharing that. Now, here's an important question. What if there's a wholesaler out there that hopefully is still listening? And I say that because maybe at the beginning they heard, athletic event, and they said, not my bag. I'd rather drink wine and hang out. What if I'm not an athlete? How do I participate? Well, first of all, can I participate? And if I can, how? Because everything you've said so far is really interesting. I can differentiate myself. I can stand up from the sea of sameness. I can increase my MQ, my memorability quotient. But dude, I'm not doing a rowing challenge. So how can I get after this if I'm not an athlete?
It's a good question. Mark, you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Rob. So Dave and I have worked together on the event for a number of years. It was just me providing casual feedback. And one of the things we've talked about and achieved is broadening the base and getting more people involved. So there's clearly, a hyper athletic set. And then I can assure you that there's room for everybody, athletes at any level, beginner to advanced, at any age. And I think that you could be a part of a team. There's now a team-based competition. So if there are 1 or 2 or 3 things you want to do out of the 10 and it's your first year doing it, we've seen people take 2 events and then the next year take 5, and then by year 3 they're up to wanting to do all 10 events. So it's a progress. There's an entry point for everybody. And if I could just say, Rob, just connecting the dots between the initial part of the conversation regarding the challenges in the business and what's needed to succeed, I think everybody's going to have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. The capital market savvy person is going to have to build greater relationships. The relationships person is going to have to build greater capital market savviness. So something like the D10, it doesn't have to be the D10, something that stretches you outside of the work into an uncomfortable place, I think helps you get more comfortable doing different stuff inside the work environment.
That's awesome. The cities, now I want to make sure, and this will make sure people are aware of this, the cities presently are New York City, Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, Houston. New York City, Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, Houston. Is that the lineup for 2017, 2018, Dave?
It's the lineup for 2017, and 2018 will add some additional cities, looking at Dallas, Denver, Seattle, LA, etc.
Nice.
Yeah.
And as far as, I know you got some network coverage, and kudos to you. You got a write-up in Forbes magazine and some network coverage. Tell us a little bit about the network coverage so people, if they are inclined, can go out and, besides your website, which we'll link up on our website, thedecathlon.org, where can they see some of this in action? If they were to, say, YouTube it, what would they be looking for?
On YouTube, you could search for the D10. We've got a full NBC Sports broadcast. You can see what that looks like. And what NBC did, to their credit, was, yes, there is a competition, at sort of that, for the titles outright, but then there is this, 90% swath of the field that is, these are advisors, wholesalers, and investors that are there for different reasons, and certainly not a reason they're not there to win the event. They're there to build the relationships and maximize their philanthropic impact, and NBC does a good job of showcasing those storylines too.
That's awesome. And I don't want to lose sight of the fact that after all is said and done, after all the discussion we've had in our brief time today about the benefits to the wholesaler, the benefits to the advisor, the benefits of all parties getting to meet one another and think out of the box and building new muscle mass, as no pun intended, as Mark alluded to, in terms of your skill set. At the end of the day, this is a philanthropic endeavor and a damn successful one. Dave, thank you for reaching out to me to make me aware of D10. I was not aware of it, and it's been delightful learning more, so thank you.
You're quite welcome. Thank you for having us on.
And Mark, deeply appreciate you weighing in on this, certainly appreciating your leadership position with D10, and I look forward to learning more about your successes in D10 in the coming years.
Rob, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Gentlemen, appreciate it. Wholesalers, come back next time for another episode of the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show. You'll find all of our content at wholesalermasterminds.com, and the podcast can be found at iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play.